Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by SmartPots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Today, we tackle a question from a listener who asks, why were my tomato seedlings last spring so skinny? Debbie Flower and I run through all the possibilities, and it turned out to be a very good tomato seed planting primer, something you may want to keep in mind when you're starting tomato seeds indoors next January or February or March. The plant of the week. It's a colorful warm season annual that will be widely used in celebrations next week. No, it's not the pumpkin for Halloween. No, it's a plant with even more cultural significance a couple of days after Halloween. It's the marigold. You're going to have to listen to find out why. It's on episode 149 of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by SmartPots and Dave Wilson Nursery. And we'll do it all in under 30 minutes. Let's go.
Hi, Fred. This is Ken from Palo Alto. And this last year, I started growing my tomato plants from seed. Starting about January, I did various varieties, including Better Boy, Early Girl, Cherokee Purple, etc. And all of the plants seemed to be a lot skinnier and less hardy in March when the garden center varieties came out. The plants also didn't seem to do as well in general. Is there any hints of what I could do better next year to grow hardier seedlings? Thanks again for all your advice, and I value your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken, from Palo Alto in the San Francisco Bay Area. He contacted us via SpeakPipe. If you'd like to give us a question, I hope you could use speakpipe.com. It's very easy. You go to speakpipe.com/gardenbasics and press the button, and away you go. And we would love to hear your voice here on the Garden Basics podcast. Debbie Flower is here, our favorite retired college horticultural professor. It sounds like Ken may need, I'm thinking, more light.
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations to Ken for starting his tomatoes from seed and getting a plant. That's a hurdle that not everyone gets over.
Yeah, but it's a good hurdle to get over just because there is just so many more varieties available via seed.
Yes. And January was about the right time to start tomatoes from seed in Palo Alto, so good timing. I think you're right. I think light is one of the factors that he may need to increase. And the other one that came to mind for me was wind. Plants, he said they're thin. Plants will be thin unless they're challenged by movement. The experiment was done by shaking a greenhouse table for 10 minutes a day. I'm not into shaking the table, so I use a fan, and that shakes the stem of the plant and makes it thicker. It'll be a shorter, stouter plant. 10 minutes a day is a good amount, and so I use an oscillating fan that goes back and forth and makes those stems move. If you've ever had a cast, have you? I have not had a cast on a limb, an arm or leg, something like that. You have to wear, if you break a bone,
Knock on wood, no.
Yeah, same here. People who have broken a bone of an arm and a leg have to wear a cast that immobilizes that part of the limb for, I think it's about 6 weeks. I'm sure it varies, and when they take the cast off, that limb is very weak. It's thin and weak. It has no muscle on it because it hasn't been used. That's what I like in the tomato that has been grown without wind is the one that's been in the cast. The one that's grown with wind is the one that has been able to exercise all those 6 weeks and create muscle. In a plant, it's called reaction wood.
Reaction wood.
Yes.
Yeah. Ken didn't give us very many details about how or where he's growing these seedlings. And I have a funny feeling if it was just in a sunny window, they would be rather bent.
Yes. Yes, he talked about thin, but he didn't mention bent, but they would bend toward the light.
Right.
He may have turned them daily and gotten them to grow straight or straighter, but that won't thicken them up.
Right. And a fan is a great idea, and maybe one of those indoor type greenhouses that's basically a plant rack with a set of fluorescent lights or LED lights above it that you can adjust the height. And a lot of people don't put those lights close enough to the seedlings. It has to be just a couple of inches above.
Yes, and they need to be, in the case of fluorescents, they need to be relatively new, not the ones you take out of your office because you're putting new ones in the office or whatever. They need to be relatively new. Fluorescent light bulbs decline in quality over time.
Like us.
No, we're getting better with age. So, yeah, and they need to be very close. It needs to be a very strong amount of light. In a class with students, I had them use light meters and measure amounts of light close to windows, let's say, and then a foot away. And the amount was incredibly different. Much less light a foot away from the window, close to a fluorescent bulb and a foot away. The amount of light declines very quickly when you get away from those light sources. So the light over a tomato, LED or fluorescent, would be ideal, because they're cool sources of light and you won't burn the leaves when you have them so close to the plant. Should be max 2 inches over the plant. Right.
And you would want it on a rack where you can easily adjust the height of the lights to allow for the plants to grow.
Right. And those are made, like you said, sort of like indoor greenhouses. One setup I had was in the guest room of a house, and I hung eye bolts in the ceiling and chains from the eye bolts and a fluorescent fixture on the chains. And so I could raise and lower the two ends of the fluorescent bulb and move the plants around so the taller ones were on one side and the shorter ones on the other side, and keep the light approximately 2 inches away from those plants.
And in my experience with fluorescent lights, the longer ones are better than the shorter ones. You can buy fluorescent bulbs as small as like a foot long, but I always opted for the 3 foot long in a dual fixture where you could mix a shop light with a cool light bulb that had sort of a blue hue to it.
Right. Fluorescents do come in, and LEDs for sure do come in different colors. You don't have to spend the money for a full spectrum bulb to grow seedlings. If you want to bring something to flower and fruit, then yes, you do. But just to grow seedlings, to start your tomatoes for your vegetable garden, you don't need a full spectrum light bulb, but you do need the blue spectrum and the pink spectrum. The one you use in the bathroom will be the pink one because it makes you look lovely. And
really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
It makes your flesh look beautiful. And then there will be the cool ones, which are the more office-y type bulbs. But they should tell you whether they're in the blue spectrum, which is cool, or the warm spectrum, which is the reds. And you want one of each. So yes, you want a fixture that will hold 2 bulbs.
And for those of you born in the 21st century, yes, LED lights are the way to go.
They are. If you've got the fixture and the money, they've gotten a lot cheaper, I have to say.
Yes, they have. And they're very adjustable. Some are on like goosenecks where you can just sort of bend it to get it closer to the plant.
If you're doing a bunch of plants, and he mentioned 1, 2, 3 at least cultivars, that one gooseneck may not be enough.
Right. As far as fertilization of these seedlings, would that help at all?
Hard to tell. He didn't tell us anything about the color of the plants. I would use color of the leaves and the stems as an indication of deficiency. If they're a good green color, then whatever he was doing was probably sufficient. But if they weren't, if they were showing yellow, then that would indicate a lack of nitrogen. But a week fertilization done on a regular basis is the best thing for the plants.
I guess we should go all the way back to the beginning to help Ken out here because, now I'm thinking, well, maybe he was using garden soil or something heavy that retained too much moisture.
Yeah, we don't know.
And was too cool. So if you are going to start tomatoes from seed, there are several ways you can do it. My favorite is to start them in 3-inch containers, maybe 3 to a pot. And then as they come up, keep the strongest one and cut off the other 2. Mm-hmm. The reason for the 3-inch pot is that way you can keep it in that pot until it's time to transfer it to the yard. Mm-hmm. It saves you a step and you won't be damaging the roots. The soil that I would use would be a seed starting mix.
Right.
And that's good enough for getting that plant started.
Yes, it is.
And a seed starting mix is usually a mix of peat or coir, maybe
compost,
and
some organic component.
Right, and perlite or your favorite lava rock or whatever it's called.
Right, pumice.
Pumice, yes.
Pumice is fairly large, but it's lightweight. Perlite is an addition to container media that I use really only when I'm starting seeds. It is actually lava rock, or a type of expanded rock, which lava rock is. Pumice doesn't come out of a volcano, but it becomes somewhat like a lava rock when it's treated. It is heated very hot like lava rock is, and it pops out sort of like popcorn. But it's lightweight, and when you start seeds, pumice is probably a little bit too heavy, too big. Unless I haven't found small pumice. Probably exists, but I haven't found it. So you want small particle sizes, and the pumice I'm aware of is a little too big for that.
So maybe like a 1/3 mix of peat moss, compost, and pumice or perlite.
Right.
And you're good to go as long as you have good drainage. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of just putting these containers where they're growing their tomato seedlings in a solid container where there is no drainage per se, that it's basically sitting in water, and you need to raise it or have a bottom container that allows for the water to fall off to a lower level.
Over time, the media in a seed starting mix, as in any container media soilless mix, will shrink down, and you think you're watering the plant, and the water goes around the top and down the sides and out the bottom, and you have it drainage in the grow pot, and then you're in some kind of solid structure underneath. Pie plates work, whatever. This won't be at the beginning where you're first starting the seed. It'll be a month in, let's say, and I let it sit in that water for an hour, maybe 2 hours. I go do something else, and I come back and then drain the liquid that's in the bottom. That amount of time allows some of the moisture to be soaked back up into the pot. If you're using a lot of fertilizer, you may end up with a white crust on the surface. That means the water has been soaked. The water and the nutrients have been soaked up to the top of the surface, and the water evaporated, the nutrients stay behind. That's an indication of too much fertilizer, but it allows that media to get wet.
At what point would you fertilize those seedlings?
I can remember laying in bed at home while I was teaching, and the students had started their seeds in media without fertilizer, and just worrying. It's a weekend, and I had to go to school, open the greenhouse, and see what was going on. When first true leaves would probably be the time to fertilize. All seeds contain a baby plant, fully formed baby plant's got roots, got something called cotyledons, which are seed leaves, and it's got a bud, which contains the first true leaves of the plant. And all it needs to do is get out of that seed and start growing and get to sun. And until it gets to sun and can make its own food, it uses what's in the cotyledons, which is plant food, to survive. And so in some plants, the cotyledons come up. Beans are a classic. The cotyledons come out of the ground. You can see them. They look like a split bean, one half on either side of the stem. Peas would be the same way. In tomatoes, yes, they get a cotyledon leaf. It's a long, thin cotyledon leaf. Then the first true leaves in a tomato are divided, and they have a more toothed margin to the edges of all those divisions.
They look like a tomato leaf.
They look like a tomato leaf, right. That's the first true leaf. At that point, the cotyledon food has typically been used up or is almost used up, and the cotyledons will turn yellow and fall off. And so that's the point where it may need more fertilizer.
And here we come back to weekly.
Weekly, right.
Yes.
Right.
A week fertilizer applied weekly.
Right.
And there are a lot of great fertilizers out there. It's just a matter of not overdoing it.
Right. You read the label and apply less than it says. Mm-hmm. Maybe as much as a quarter of what it says, or as little, I should say, as a quarter of what it says on the label to use.
And probably the easiest to apply would be a water-soluble fertilizer.
Yes.
And whatever you do not, if you're using crystals that are water-soluble, don't scatter the crystals on the surface of the soil and then water it in.
That will burn.
Yeah.
I have to say that I have, with the students, because I did lay at home worrying.
Exciting life you lead.
Yes, I know. I did put a little bit of time-release fertilizer into the seedling media. Now that, I have to say, it may cause problems with some plants. It did not with tomatoes. There is the potential that it could be too strong. Time-release fertilizer is pelleted, and when it gets wet, the coating, they act somewhat differently, but the coating reacts to moisture. It either dissolves or it allows enough moisture in that the little pellet pops open. In either case, when the fertilizer is released, right at that pellet, the fertilizer is very strong, and that can harm a baby root. And if you've only got one baby root, it could kill your plant. I did not experience death in tomatoes by using time-release fertilizer in the seedling mix.
Okay, lucky you.
It's possible that other plants did not come up because of that technique. So it's something to be very careful with if you're going to try it. Do half the crop with, half the crop without. See what happens.
One thing we didn't mention, and we should stress, is before you put that seed in that mix of peat moss and lava rock and compost, would be to thoroughly water that mix.
Right. I always want the students to water. Not everyone agrees with me, but to water the mix before we put it in the pot. In little pots, it's not so critical, 6-packs, let's say. But the larger the pot you use, the more critical it becomes, because when you water, there's nothing to help draw that moisture down into the media. Peat moss in particular is hydrophobic, and it does not easily absorb moisture. You have to sort of work it to get it to absorb moisture when it is perfectly dry. Other things aren't quite so bad in terms of being hydrophobic. If it's wet before you put it in the pot, you know it's wet all the way down, and the roots can travel all the way down.
My fear would be if you don't water that mix and you stick the seed in a ½ inch or whatever the instructions tell you, probably a 1/4 inch. Basically, and then you water it, it's going to drive that seed further down into the mix.
Well, that's true too. Moisture settles things a little bit.
Yeah.
You don't ever want to push on the media in a container. You do the tap.
Explain that.
So you've made your media. We used kitty litter pans or bus trucks, the kind of thing you'd see in a restaurant where they would collect your plates.
All right.
And students would get media, water it, then use their hands to mix. I like to wear gloves at home when I do that part so that it doesn't get under my fingernails and destroy everything. So mixing the moist media, then fill the pots to the very top, and then tap it on the bench. Mm-hmm. So you're just hitting the bench a couple of times, and that settles it. If you push on it, we're strong compared to baby plants,
yes.
And we can push all the holes out of that media, and then the plant will struggle to get its roots down.
It needs air.
It needs air. Absolutely.
Down there. I, on the other hand, will take the 3 ingredients in that soil mix and mix it by hand, because I love the feel of it, in a bucket, and then pour water in the bucket, come back a couple hours later.
Let it do its thing alone.
Yep. And then just grab a big glop of it and throw it in a 3-inch container.
Okay.
I'll have to add the tapping to it.
Well, maybe the throwing is a substitute for the tapping.
Okay. But Ken, I hope that helps you, and that may solve, in a lot of situations, the skinny stems.
Right, and contact us again and let us know what happens.
Yeah. The word of warning, though, is it used to be that you could plant that seed in late February, and then by late April, it would be a transplantable size after 8 weeks or so. But in this day and age, with people planting out here in California, especially in now late March and early April, and I still say, you're just lucky. That's all. You're just lucky. You may want to move it back to late January, but I still prefer February for starting tomato seeds. I'll start pepper seeds in January because they take
slower.
longer. Yeah, they're much slower.
They're slower.
And
in Palo Alto and here where we live, we have such a long growing season that there's no need to rush it. But there are people who want to have the first tomato on the block.
Yes, they do. If you want that, just grow a cherry tomato. That works. Ken, thanks so much for your question. Debbie Flower, thanks for your help on this.
Always a pleasure, Fred.
We're glad to have SmartPots on board supporting the Garden Basics podcast. SmartPots, it's the original award-winning fabric planter. It's sold worldwide, and SmartPots are proudly made 100% in the USA. SmartPots come in a wide array of sizes and colors. If a frost or freeze is in the forecast, moving your frost tender plants that are in the SmartPots that have handles make them easier to move closer to the house for added warmth, or you could even move them inside for the winter. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of SmartPots lightweight, colorful fabric containers. And don't forget that /Fred part, because on that page are details of discounts when you buy SmartPots at Amazon. If you want to see them before you buy, SmartPots are available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. To find a store near you, visit smartpots.com/Fred. If you're thinking of growing fruit trees, or maybe you already have your own backyard full of fruit trees, well, you probably have a million questions. Like, which fruit trees will grow well where I live? What are the tastiest fruits to grow? How do I care for them? What are the most important things to know when starting a backyard orchard? Well, the good news is those answers are just a click away with the informative videos that you can find at davewilson.com. That's Dave Wilson Nursery, the nation's largest grower of fruit trees for the backyard garden. At davewilson.com, you'll also find planting tips, taste test results, fruit variety recommendations, and links to nurseries in your area that carry Dave Wilson fruit trees. Your harvest to better health begins at davewilson.com. Every week, we like to talk with Warren Roberts. He is the Superintendent Emeritus of the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden, and he has a great plant of the week for us. And here it is, Halloween week. But there are even holidays after Halloween, including All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. And there is a plant that's associated with November 2nd, All Souls' Day, and it is a plant that does well in many, many places. And Warren, I bet that would be the marigold.
That would be the marigold. And before we delve into it too much, the marigold that I'm talking about today is the one with the generic name Tagetes, because there is also, the word marigold is used for calendula. Calendula is bloom, similar colors, orange and yellow flowers, but the Tagetes has become more common and more commonly grown. And the name Tagetes comes from Etruscan. Tages means born from the plowing of the earth, and it refers, in this case, to the ease with which the marigolds are cultivated. They are native mostly to Mexico, into Central America. They're the few that get in the U.S. This is to say the species, and also down through the Andes. The typical marigold, which we think of as the African marigold, Tagetes erecta, is actually not from Africa. It's from Mexico, and a better name would be the Aztec marigold, sometimes called the American marigold, but unfortunately, African marigold is in the literature. It's kind of like turkeys are from Mexico. They're not from Turkey. The confusion, once it is sown, it often has a life of its own. So another close related species, Tagetes patula, is typically called the French marigold. And that is not from France originally either, but evidently a lot of the breeding was done. There are actually 50 species of Tagetes beyond the commonly grown ones. Another marigold, which is becoming more and more popular, are hybrids derived from Tagetes tenuifolia. These are called the cygnet marigolds, and they have smaller flowers. The leaves are divided into usually feathery lobes. And where I lived in South America, where the Tagetes tenuifolia was native, it's called anís del campo, because the foliage has a licorice-like flavor. And it was used for making teas. These Mexican species bloom at this time of year, and this is the time of All Souls' Day. They're used in celebrations in cemeteries in Mexico. It's interesting that in the native country, it is used for that kind of a celebration. In other parts of the world, like India and Thailand and Ukraine, the marigold has become a symbol for celebration. In fact, there is a movie about about Indian celebrations, and the marigold itself is one of the main characters. In those areas, it has become so popular that people think of it as a plant native to that area. But no, it's from Mexico. The marigolds are pollinated by butterflies, bumblebees, and beetles. The flowers are used as a food colorant in some countries, and there are other species that I should mention. Tagetes lucida is sometimes called Mexican tarragon, and a traditional tea is made of it in Mexico called pericon. It has a licorice-like flavor and evidently has a non-alkaloid hallucinogen that has not been identified. I've never had enough of it to have that effect, but it's easier for me, it's been easier to grow than tarragon, and which is in the same botanical family, but it's not quite the same.
That plant, the Mexican marigold, isn't that a perennial in many zones?
They can be, but if you have none of the marigolds are hardy to real strong frost. It gets them. There is one called Tagetes lemoni, the Copper Canyon daisy, or the Mount Lemon, the daisy named for that mountain outside of Tucson, is hardy usually down to, if you have snow, a light snow, it will survive that, although it would probably be frozen back. The Copper Canyon daisy is a magnificent cloud of orange flowers a little bit later in the fall. It's an interesting genus, beautiful flowers. Now, some people complain about the smell. Well, the foliage of marigolds, all of them, is strong, although some marigolds have been bred to not have this characteristic smell. But there are some species, Tagetes elliptica and Tagetes minuta, where the plant is actually grown for that flavor. And it's an ingredient in Peruvian cooking, also associated areas like Ecuador and Bolivia. And I like the flavor. Gotten to like the flavor, I'll put it that way. It's delicious with boiled potatoes as a sauce for guinea pig and other things like that. Well, I did live in Peru in the mountains. So
well, the next time I'm going to be putting a guinea pig on the old rotisserie, I'll remember that for a sauce.
and that would be Tagetes minuta. Now, Tagetes minuta is a weed in the southeast U.S., but there are substances produced by the roots of the plant that are abhorrent to nematodes. So it's and some soil bacteria. In fact, it's not a good idea to plant marigolds with leguminous crops like beans. They get into a fight there at the root zone.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What does guinea pig taste like?
Oh, I would say chicken.
Okay.
or rabbit, maybe more rabbit.
Okay.
Very sweet, succulent. And they're prepared so that you scald it like you would a chicken to get the feathers off, and in this case to get the fur off. And then the skin is, when it's fried, it's very, very crisp. And there's a compliment in the Andes. I just know it in Spanish, where a young man will be very enamored with the young lady, and he will say, "You're as delicious as the golden fried skin of a guinea pig. Tú eres tan rico como el viejo dorado de un cuy." And that's supposed to eventually turn heads.
Yeah, that ranks right up there with a lyric from a Loretta Lynn song, which in the lyric was, "Hey, Loretta, I love you more than my Irish setter." But something along those lines. All right.
Something. Aren't we a marvelous species?
Yes. All right. Well, the marigold, it's easy to grow. It likes full sun, regular watering. It lasts until a good frost comes along. Again, it's a beautiful plant, very colorful, used in a lot of ceremonies. Marigold, the Tagetes, and it's an Etruscan name. How many plants are named from the Etruscan language?
Well, this is the first one I've come across, but I bet there are more. The Latin language developed in that area. So
yeah, well, that's interesting. Well, the marigold anyway. Warren Roberts of the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden. Thanks for telling us about the plant of the week, the marigold.
You're welcome.
Don't forget, if you want to learn more about the topics covered on today's episode of Garden Basics with Farmer Fred, subscribe to the free Garden Basics newsletter on Substack. Details are in today's show notes. The Garden Basics podcast will be on its winter schedule from November through January, and that means there will only be one episode per week during that 3-month period. But because there's so much to talk about, there's a good chance those weekly episodes will be longer than 30 minutes. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by SmartPots, and it's available for free wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and leaving comments. We appreciate it.